Hi everyone, this is going to be a complete demo on how to prep panels for acrylic painting. Now I prep my own, but I still pretty much stay with standard sizes. And the reason why is you will save a lot of money by prepping your own. But if you start getting into custom sizes, in other words, any size you want to make, but then you'll also get into custom framing. Now, I don't worry about custom framing as much as the cost goes, but only because I prefer working in standard sizes. Those are all the aspect ratios I am familiar with, whether it be a 2:3, a 3:4, or a 4:5 aspect ratio. We'll go over all of those shortly and discuss the differences between them and how they can relate to what subject matter you want to paint. Now what I do is I gesso it real thin coats and almost smear it on, and for me what that does is minimize the amount of sanding needed, because I'd rather keep the gesso on the board than sand it off. But then I also want a really nice glass smooth surface. So what I do is by smearing it on, I make sure there's no gobs anywhere, because when you start painting, especially a solid color in a big area, if you look across it, you may see some imperfections of your surface that you're trying to paint a nice even color on. So that is very important when it's under lights and you can see that a shape sticking out from your panel may cast a shadow. Let's go ahead and start to see first of how we could divide up our 4x8 sheet into various sizes and keep our waste to a minimum. Let's take a look at that next. Okay, let's take a look and see how I did this. Now this image here is a full 96 inches wide by 48 inches high at 300 dpi. So that's a very big image to work with, period, no matter what. But it's the idea that I want this actual size, and what I did was go up to here and bring down our grid. And how I did this was every 12 inches, I have a blue line, which is this right here, and then a subdivision of 12, which would be the inches of the yellow line right here. So what that does for me is gives me every foot, 8 feet total by 4 feet wide, and then a square inch of 144 in each square foot, which would be 144 square inches. Now what that does is gives me the ability to right away know that if I want a piece 2 feet wide to divide it up, that would be my 2 foot mark right there. Then I would just draw a guide down through that of a red line, and I'll know that's where a cut is. Okay, let's take a look at our first cut. Again, these are just different aspect ratios, but just to try and maximize our 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of masonite or plywood, depending on what you want to pick. But again, be careful, because these are all materials that are based on housing construction and alike, so they're not really meant to be or made for fine art archival panels. So you want to be careful with what you pick out and how we're going to prep it here shortly. Here's another example. And again, just different ways of laying it out just to maximize my 4 foot by 8 foot sheet. Here's some smaller pieces if I want one big one, but then I want some 18 by 24s. Here's a panoramic, a 12 by 24. That would be a 1:2 ratio, that it is twice as wide as it is high. And then a very standard 16 by 20. And the last one I want to show you is all 16 by 24s. That is the aspect ratio of a 35 millimeter, which is a very common size also. But what it does is completely uses up our 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of masonite or plywood. But now how we cut that is going to be a really big difference of whether or not we lose the entire last piece altogether. When we make these cuts here, these will all be the same size exactly, but this one might be really short, and I'll show you why. What we're going to do is I'm going to turn this off, and we're going to move into cut marks, and they're way up here in the corner. And I'll just zoom in. Now this is important only because if you cut them yourself, then you definitely want to make sure your panels are as parallel edged as possible. When you go to drop it in a frame, you don't want any problems later after you already have the painting finished. Some folks pick out their frames after the painting's done to match the frame according to the painting, but also the painting is already done, and what you don't want to do is have any problems with dropping it in your frame. Here is what I'm getting at. If you cut them yourself, you'll have total control over this, and it'll be up to you. However, if you take it to a lumber yard or anyone that operates a panel saw that will cut it for you, you may need to tell them how you want it cut. Now, in construction, critical cuts aren't as serious as a cut for a fine art painting. What do I mean by that? Well, if a panel saw operator cuts it, they may want to put a production stop on this edge of the plywood or masonite itself. Now what that'll do is then it gives them the opportunity to just slide in the board up against the panel stop and then mark their first one, and then that would be 16 inches from the blade to the production stop. Now then all they have to do is make a cut and then slide it in again, make another cut, slide it in again, make another cut. In other words, they don't even have to measure each time they cut. However, that is going to really leave you short for the very last piece. The reason why is every time you cut, you're losing the width of the blade, which is on average an 1/8 inch. So my first piece will definitely be 16 inches. So will my second piece, but you can see now where the cut is going to be. If this edge from here to here is going to be 16 inches. So every time I cut, my final piece will be really short. However, there's a workaround to that. If I take the time to mark each 16 inches on that board and then cut on each one of those lines, what I'm doing is splitting the difference of the cut. The first one should only be about a 1/16 inch short, which would be nice to drop down into a pre-made frame. The middle pieces will be about an 1/8 inch short, which is still acceptable to drop into a pre-made frame. The final one, just like the first one, will be only a 1/16 inch short. That is because we're splitting the difference of that 1/8 inch blade on every piece compared to leaving all of those widths of the blade build up to the very end. So just something to think about when you get your piece cut. If you have somebody cutting it for you, you have to make sure you tell them what you need and what it's for. Let's move on to the actual finishing of the panel. Okay, let's first take a look at some pre-made panels. These are Gesso board by Ampersand, and this one is 11x14, 8x10, and just for example, these are the hardboard, but they're only 1/8 inch thick, so they will go all the way up to about a 24x36, and then after that they become boxed. Now I don't have any of those. I don't use them. I just don't want my painting that far away from the wall. I would rather drop it straight into a frame and then be flush up against the wall. In fact, I even prefer frames that go back away from the painting instead of coming out. Now for these boards here, this is 11x14, here is the 16x20, and this is kind of the unofficial rundown. And these are from Jerry's Artorama, a single 8x10 1/8 inch. The regular price is $9.74. Right now they have a super sale going on. It's $8.29, and then a box of 3 of 8x10s is normally $15.48. Right now it's $13.18. Now that's just to give you an idea of how much pre-made panels are. 16x20. Now I could not even find a box of 3 1/8 inch, so you'd probably literally have to buy 3 singles if you wanted that many.
1/8 inch single, normally $25.48, and then the supercell price is $21.25. But then after that, if you go up to the 2-inch boxed, then it would be $64.16 for a regular price, and then $53.92 for a supercell price. But they always don't have those, so you could take it from there. But then now, if you get a box of 4 of 2-inch boxed, then 4 of them would set you back $243.79 regular price, and $215 for the supercell price. But then again, like I said, sometimes these prices over here are hard to catch. Now, my point is, they are very good. They are ready to go. And if you like glass smooth, they are glass smooth. Now, this is my front side, and you could see that the edge is really nice. It's a really clean edge. And then what I did was, you have to be aware of which way the rotation of the blade is going, especially if somebody is doing this for you. And the reason why is, on a panel saw, that would give you the most parallel cuts to make sure it's 16 from here to here and 16 from here to here. You're not gonna get any kind of triangular pieces that you might start going off, but then it'll also give you a nice perfect straight cut. But now what I did was concentrate on most panels. Most plywood have a good side and a mediocre side. So you want to be aware of what side you want to be your front side. This is a side I picked for my front, but then what I wanted to make sure I did was, depending on how the blade was rotating, if it's a panel saw, then it might be rotating this way. So I actually wanted my face side down. But then what I also did was, you can see, is I took the time, and the gentleman who cut these for me, because if you go to like a big box store or lumber store, they're not going to let you use their saw due to insurance purposes. What I did was, they allowed me, I just went on off hours and I taped the edges before they cut them. And now on the back side is very nice edges also. And the reason why is, this is a scrap piece of Lawan that I just used as a shelf. The front side is nice and cut, nice and smooth, but because I didn't tape this piece when I cut it, this side is pretty rough. And what happens is, when the blade is coming up and cutting the wood, it's going to chip it pretty good, especially if it's not a very sharp or new blade. Because keep in mind, if you're at a box store, this is construction wood, and they always don't worry about that type of a cut, because it's going to get covered by another building material anyway. But for you, if it's this rough, you may not want it this rough. Even if it's on your back side, that's starting to splinter quite a bit, and it could give you problems down the line when you go to drop it into your frame. Another thing to think about when you get your pieces cut. Now, this is my backside with this right here and a couple of knots, not too bad. This is the maple. Now, this whole entire sheet of 4 foot by 8 foot, I paid about $47 for. Now, keep in mind, building materials, the price is going to vary quite a bit depending on where you're located. Otherwise, if you order the pre-made panels, then the bottom line is, you could have them shipped to you and it wouldn't pretty much matter where you live then. Okay, again, this is my front side, and sometimes it's even good to really watch that if you get birch, it's usually a little bit more clear than maple. Maple may have some discolorations here, like this one on the back side. And the only thing is, you got to be careful with the gesso, that if you do apply thin layers like I do, because I want it on real nice and smooth, then you have to make sure it's going to be enough coats to cover your dark spots, because you definitely wouldn't want this dark spot bleeding through your gesso and into your painting to distort the colors of the painting itself. Now, what I will do is use this product right here. This is premium water based. You'll see when I start to use it, it's milky white, just like any kind of a matte finish or gloss finish. What this is Polycrylic Max by Minwax, and it's crystal clear protection, maximum durability in one coat, no sanding, dries in an hour. This is clear satin, and what I want to do is create a water resistant barrier on all 6 sides of this wood, the 4 edges and front and back. And this way it will try to keep the wood as stable as possible and the exact size it is right now. Water resistant is completely different than waterproof. You're just trying to minimize the absorption if it's in a high humidity area. If you get into waterproof, then that may be a completely different covering, and what that may be is a marine grade product that would probably be oil based, and then also I don't know if I would want a water based gesso sitting on top of an oil based polyurethane. So I would prefer to use this myself. If you need to go further, then that is up to you. What we'll do is we will seal all 6 sides, leave it dry for at least an hour, and then we'll start gessoing our front side, 4 different coats. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we're going to get started just real quick before I go into the speed. Here's what it looks like. It is milky white. Looks just like a matte medium or a gloss medium acrylic, because that's all it is. And then also, this also should be stirred and not shaken. So we're going to go ahead and start, and we will go ahead and speed cover this. And then keep in mind, I normally do this in a workshop and not at the drawing board. The 1/4 inch maple I'm using is considered sanded maple, and it's ready to go. It is as good as finish as I could get on it, which is a great time and work saver. Working with this particular Minwax Polycrylic, it has a dry time of an hour for touch, but 24-hour for typical workload. This is how long I would wait before I put my first layer of gesso on it. Let's take a look and see what we have to make sure we have no dry spots anywhere and it's evenly covered on all sides. Let's go ahead and apply the first layer of gesso. Okay, we're all ready to go. It's dry enough to put the first coat of gesso down, and what I want to show you is all I did was dry sand the face of it and then lightly sand the edges, the very edge of the front, just to remove any kind of strings or small splinters that might have been hanging out a little bit, because usually when you give wood a layer or a coat of any kind of sealer stain or anything, it'll swell up a little bit and it might get a little bit rougher than it was. And then also if you have any strings or anything that might be sticking out, that's when I want to just sand them off. So I just went around the edge, the very edge itself, and then the front, and I just wanted to dry sand it because I didn't want to introduce any kind of water to the sealer coat with the chance of the wood soaking up a little bit of the water before I seal it. I don't want to seal water into the wood, that's for sure. But using a block, I apply even pressure throughout the entire surface of the block instead of using my fingertips. And if I try to sand with my fingertips, I don't want to develop any kind of like small holes or small valleys just because my fingertips are the only thing that are working. This way, using a block to the entire surface of the block down on whatever I'm sanding. Let's go ahead and give it our first coat of gesso. As I'm painting on the first coat, I'm using more of a smear technique than a flow technique. I want to try and wipe down the gesso as much as possible to give a nice even thin coat with very little brush strokes. This helps me eliminate excessive sanding in the end. Okay, that's it. That's all I could do for this coat, and I will leave it dry Usually at least even overnight would not hurt. And then I will give it another coat as soon as it's dry. That will be the second one of 4 coats. Okay, I think the first coat is pretty well dry, and we're ready to go with our second coat. Now again, this isn't too bad at all because of how I smear it on. The brush strokes are too minimal, and it is easy to work with once I get to my final coat. Again, I don't sand in between coats, I just apply coat after coat. Now we're going in and painting the second coat. I just want to spread it out again as much as I possibly can and feather it and work it in at the exact opposite direction of the first coat. This I found even minimizes sanding even more once I get to my fourth and final coat. Let's wait for this one to dry. Okay, we're dry enough and ready for coat number 3. I'm going to go back this way now, the opposite direction. Remember, this is just the way I do it. You may have to adjust this system a little bit depending on your style or, more importantly, your budget. I even know some artists who just use plain flat house paint to prep panels that they want to practice on. When I paint my panels, I listen for the hiss. If it glides real smooth, then I'm putting it on too heavy for me. I like to use it in a very thin layer. Okay, there's coat number 3. Okay, this is our fourth and final coat, but for those that are very observant, this side is a little bit dark, and you can really notice it with everything being white. And the reason why is this one is set at 100%, and this one is only set at about 55%, which is normally the amount of power I use at ISO 200 at 1/100th of a second at f4.5. With all that said, I'm getting 289 over here, and I'm getting f4.2 here, which is pretty good over here, but this one is showing quite dark because I would still have to open up even more light over here. But then keep in mind, this one is set twice as bright as this one over here, and it's still coming out dark. So I did put in an email to Small Rig, and hopefully I'll be able to get this fixed so I can continue on with my demos, but they are going to be a little bit dark as long as I keep using them like this. We're going to go ahead and give this one the fourth and final coat, and that will be it. Because of how long some of my paintings take, I often put some aside to work on others. Then I could go back with a fresh eye to see what's going on. Unfortunately, this causes me to change the drawing board angle along with my power settings and the angle of the video lights. I like to keep the frame full of the painting to best see what's going on at the time I'm painting. Let's go ahead and finish this final coat and get it ready to sand so we could do some acrylic painting. Okay, looks pretty good. We'll leave it there. Dry real good overnight. We'll sand it tomorrow. And that will be it. We'll be ready to paint. See ya in 24. Okay, our final coat is dry. If I turn it sideways, you might be able to see the brushstroke marks. They are very subtle. When I do it this way, I really save myself time and energy of sanding it out very much smoother. Now, there are some artists that even use a scraper to smooth it around. That takes a little bit of a touch to do it. I prefer a brush only because you could start scraping it down to where there's hardly any at all on the board. But for them, it does work good, and that's what is important. Use whatever works the best for you. For me, a real thin coat ×4 with a brush works the best for me. Now, when I sand, I'm going to use 400. That's all I need. There is 600, but 400 is good enough for me. I will wet it, And then when I sand, again, I like to use a block because it keeps even pressure on top of the entire block surface. That way, I'm not just using my fingertips again. But what I will do though is after I start sanding, then what I do is I turn the block on edge and then just wipe off the water and the sanding dust mixed in with the water down the drain, and that's it. Grab a little bit more water and start sanding again. And this way, once it's done, it is pretty much glass smooth, or smooth enough to the point where anything that's left would be filled in by the first couple of coats of background color anyway. That the reason why I say that is, and when it comes to acrylics, if you need a nice deep blue or a specific color that you're going to work with on your backgrounds, even if it's like a medium gray, you're gonna probably need a couple of coats anyway, only to cover good. Otherwise you might start getting a brush pattern up against the white of the background. Some even kill the white with brown and then go from there. You could also do that. That depends on how your painting style is. I'm gonna go ahead and sand this down over to sink, and I'll be right back with the finished product. Okay, that's it, we're done. It's all sanded, and all I do is just take a little wee patch at a time with water and the 400 sandpaper, but it's interesting that it's the exact opposite of when I paint it on. When I paint it on, if there is a little bit of a sloppy sound, I keep spreading it out until I hear a hiss. When I go to sand it, as soon as I start sanding it, I hear a hiss, and until that hiss disappears, then I know I've sanded enough in that area. Now this is really glass smooth for me, as far as it's good enough that there may be some very subtle brush strokes still, but I really don't need it that perfect of a glass smooth. The only reason why is once I start painting it, then those brush strokes will have a far more effect on the finished surface than what my gesso will. This is just the way I do it. You'll have to figure out the best way that works for you depending on how you paint or what your subject matter is. And again, in the end, you will definitely save yourself some money, but it is a little bit of work, and you could create any size you want. So, hopefully you got a little bit out of this demo. Until I see you again out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching.